The words of the prophet Ezekiel echo across time, not as ancient poetry, but as living fire. They were not merely written for a people scattered long ago. They were carved for the days when history would bend toward its appointed hour. Ezekiel was called to speak of visions that seemed impossible, a valley of dry bones rising to life, a people scattered among the nations returning to their land. A storm of nations gathered against them, and the hand of God moving in ways that shake empires. What seemed distant in his day now stands as a signpost in ours. When we open the book of Ezekiel, we are not gazing at fading ink, but at a mirror of unfolding reality. The prophet spoke of bones scattered in desolation, lifeless and forgotten. To the world it was the end of a people, the end of a covenant, the end of a witness. Yet God asked, "Can these bones live?" Ezekiel responded, "Lord, you know." And in that moment, the impossible was declared possible. From silence came breath. From death came life. From exile came homecoming. For 2,000 years, the promise lingered in the dust of history, mocked by kings and dismissed by scholars. Yet in our time the bones rose, the people returned, and a nation that should never have been reborn stood alive again upon the earth. This was not a coincidence of politics, but the working of the same hand that guided Ezekiel's vision. But Ezekiel's prophecy did not end with restoration. He saw storms of nations rising, alliances forming, and armies gathering against the land of Israel. He spoke of names that to his hearers were strange. Yet across centuries those same names now echo with familiarity. He foresaw a confederation from the north, joined by allies from distant regions, converging against the people who had returned. It would be more than a war of armies. It would be a clash of powers, a contest between kingdoms, a stage upon which the sovereignty of God would be revealed. For when all the world looks and says, "Israel cannot stand," the hand of heaven will move, and what seems fragile will be defended by the one who called them back from the grave of history. The vision carries weight for our generation. We live in a world where alliances shift overnight, where nations arm themselves with weapons of devastation, where hatred stirs in ancient lands, and where a tiny strip of land becomes the focus of global tension. To understand the present, one must look through the lens of prophecy. Ezekiel declared that it would not be Israel's strength that delivers her, but the intervention of God Himself. The armies that march will find themselves not only confronting a people, but facing the author of history. And when the dust clears, the world will know there is one who rules above every throne. This is more than a lesson in geopolitics. It is a message for every soul. The same God who breathes life into bones can breathe life into what is broken in us. The same God who brings a scattered nation home can gather the fragments of our lives. The same God who stands against the armies of the world can stand as our defender when the forces of despair surround us. Ezekiel's vision is not confined to Israel. It is a pattern of resurrection, redemption, and divine faithfulness. What seems hopeless can rise again. What seems lost can be restored. What seems defeated can stand victorious by His hand. We are called, then, not only to observe prophecy, but to live within it. If bones could rise in the valley, then we must ask what bones in our own lives are waiting for breath. If Israel could return after centuries, then we must ask what promises of God in our lives still wait for fulfillment. If nations could align against the plan of God and yet be overturned, then we must ask whether we are standing with the purposes of heaven or resisting them. Prophecy is not given for curiosity, but for decision, for alignment, for preparation. There is an urgency here. Ezekiel saw a people restored, but he also saw a world shaken. The restoration of Israel is not the end of the story, but the beginning of a greater confrontation. History is accelerating toward that moment, and the signs are multiplying. We see divisions deepening, conflicts widening, and powers rising. We see hostility against Israel intensifying, even as the nation thrives. We see nations seeking alliances that echo the words Ezekiel recorded millennia ago. The pieces of the vision are moving into place. But in this, there is also hope. The end of Ezekiel's prophecy is not destruction but glory. The valley of dry bones becomes an army. The people once scattered become rooted. The land once desolate becomes fruitful, and the name of God is revealed to the nations. So it shall be in the final chapter. Out of conflict will come clarity. Out of shaking will come revelation. Out of trial will come testimony. The world will not end in the triumph of darkness, but in the unveiling of the one who was and is to come. Ezekiel stood by the river of exile when he received his visions. He saw the wheels within wheels, the glory of the Lord departing from the temple, and the promise that one day the glory would return. We stand now in days where that return draws nearer. We must choose where we stand. Will we stand with the bones, lifeless and scattered? Or will we stand with the Spirit that breathes life? Will we stand with the armies of men? Or will we stand with the kingdom that cannot be shaken? The choice is set before every generation, and ours may well be the one that sees the fulfillment of what Ezekiel foresaw. Therefore, let us not only hear but respond. Let us awaken from slumber, for the times are urgent. Let us lift our eyes from fear, for the hand of God is not bound. Let us walk in faith, for he who restored Israel will restore all who call upon him. The prophecy is not a warning of doom, but a call to readiness, a call to faith, a call to stand in the day when nations shake. For as surely as the bones lived, as surely as the people returned, as surely as nations will rise, so surely will the hand of God be revealed. And when it is, no power on earth will stand against it. When Ezekiel looked out over the valley of dry bones, he did not only see the past tragedy of Israel, but the mystery of the future. He was shown that what is scattered will one day be gathered, what is lifeless will one day stand, and what is despised will one day shine. But the prophecy stretches even further. It was not simply about a nation restored to its land, but about a spiritual reality breaking forth into the world. The bones rising were not only a picture of Israel's return, but a foretelling of the power of God to bring revival in the last days. What was written for Israel becomes a pattern for all peoples, a pattern of awakening, shaking, and revealing. As Israel has been restored, the world has entered a new stage of history. Ezekiel's vision moves from restoration to confrontation. He describes nations aligning against the land, drawn not by accident but by a hidden force. He calls it hooks placed in their jaws, pulling them toward a collision they cannot resist. To the world it will look like strategy, politics, or revenge, but behind it stands a mystery. Just as Pharaoh's heart was hardened, just as Babylon rose for a season, so too will these nations be stirred. And the stage will be set not for their triumph, but for their undoing. Consider the times in which we live. In the days after Israel was reborn, many doubted it would last. Surrounded by enemies, attacked in wars, threatened by powers far greater than itself, Israel should have vanished. Yet it endured. This survival itself is a sign. Nations rose to destroy it, but in each moment of peril, the outcome shifted beyond expectation. The prophecy of Ezekiel is that this conflict will intensify until it reaches a moment that shakes the world. Nations from the north and regions far away will come with their armies and their plans, yet they will meet not a weak nation but the hand of the Almighty. Why does God allow such a moment? Ezekiel tells us, it is so that all the earth may know who He is. The nations trust in weapons, in alliances, in numbers. Israel cannot match them in power. Yet when victory comes, it will not be claimed by Israel's strength, but by the God who defends. In that moment, the illusion of human power will crumble, and the truth of divine sovereignty will shine. Just as the Exodus revealed God to Egypt and the nations, so the final conflict will reveal Him to the modern world. This is not only a story of nations. It is a call for each life. There comes a time when the forces against us seem overwhelming, when what rises against us is far greater than our strength. We feel as Israel, small in the face of armies, weak before the tide. But the same God who defends his people will defend all who put their trust in him. When we reach the moment where our own power is not enough, we are positioned to see his power revealed. That is why Ezekiel's vision speaks to us all. Look closer at the prophecy. Ezekiel not only describes war but fire, earthquakes, and shaking. It is as if nature itself responds. The earth quakes when kingdoms rise against God's plan. Creation groans when humanity resists its creator. The storm of nations is joined by the shaking of the earth. What is happening in the spiritual is revealed in the natural. When God moves, it is not subtle, it is not hidden. It is a shaking that reaches to the very ground beneath our feet. And yet, in that shaking, the people of God are preserved. We see the foreshadowing of this even now. The world is unsettled. Economies are fragile. Conflicts erupt in places long thought stable. The balance of power shifts suddenly, and what seems secure is shaken. These are not random events, but reminders that no empire, no system, no throne on earth stands unshakable. Only the kingdom of God remains. Ezekiel's prophecy is the assurance that though the world shakes, his purpose will not fail. But there is another layer. After the battle is described, Ezekiel speaks of cleansing, of renewal, of the outpouring of the Spirit. This is not only a prophecy of war, but of awakening. The same Spirit that breathed life into dry bones will be poured out on a restored people. The end of conflict is not desolation, but revival. The land becomes fruitful. The people know their God. The nations see his hand. And from Jerusalem a stream flows that heals. This points us forward to the greater promise. The confrontation of nations is not the conclusion, but the gateway. What follows is the unveiling of glory. Ezekiel ends not with destruction, but with a vision of a new temple, a river flowing from its threshold, and life wherever the river goes. The name given to that city is, "The Lord is there." This is the final destination of prophecy, not endless conflict, but the presence of God dwelling among his people. So what does this mean for us now? It means we are living in the in-between. The bones have risen. The nation has returned, the stage is set, but the final chapters are still to come. We are called not to fear, but to prepare. Just as Ezekiel was commanded to speak to the bones, we are called to speak life into a world of despair. Just as Ezekiel was shown the storm of nations, we are called to stand in faith when the nations shake. Just as Ezekiel saw the river of life, we are called to drink of that river even now, a drawing strength from his Spirit. Every generation is given a calling. Ours may be the one that witnesses the convergence of prophecy and history. If so, then our calling is urgent. We cannot be passive observers. We must be living witnesses, standing in faith, speaking life, preparing the way. The prophecy of Ezekiel is not given to leave us in fear, but to anchor us in hope. For just as surely as the bones lived, as surely as Israel returned, as surely as nations will rise, so surely will the hand of God be revealed, and so surely will his presence dwell among his people. Therefore, let us not live as though the words of Ezekiel are distant. They are near, they are alive, they are unfolding. And as they unfold, we are called to rise with them. The same Spirit that brought bones to life is the Spirit that can bring us to life. The same God who gathers a scattered people can gather us from our wandering. The same power that will shake nations can lift us above our fears. The prophecy is not only about what God will do in the world, but what he can do in us. And when that day comes, when the nations gather and the earth shakes, those who trust in him will not be shaken. For they will stand in the presence of the one whose name is above every name, the one who brings life to the valley, the one who writes the end from the beginning. Ezekiel's journey does not end in the valley of bones. or on the battlefield of nations. His vision carries us to something far greater, an ending that is not truly an end, but the beginning of what every prophecy points toward, the return of glory. The prophet was shown a future temple, a dwelling place of God not made to decay or fade, and from it flowed a river. That river is no ordinary stream. It grows deeper as it moves forward, bringing life wherever it touches. It is the final promise that death will give way to life, desolation will give way to fruitfulness, and absence will give way to presence. The name of the city will be, "The Lord is there." That name tells the story of all prophecy, God returning to dwell among His people. Think of what this means. The same book that begins with the vision of glory departing from the temple ends with glory returning. At the start, the people are in exile, their city in ruins, their hope cut off. But by the end, the city is rebuilt, the temple restored, and the presence of God filling the land. What was lost is regained. What was broken is healed. What was scattered is gathered. This is the message of Ezekiel. The hand of God writes restoration over every page of history. This promise has always pointed beyond the walls of Jerusalem. The river Ezekiel saw is not bound by geography. It is a symbol of the Spirit of God, flowing from His dwelling into every corner of the earth. Wherever the water flows, life springs up. Trees grow along its banks, bearing fruit each month. Their leaves are for healing. The barren places become fertile. The salty waters become fresh. The desert blooms. This is more than a vision for Israel. It is a vision for the world. It is the promise that God's Spirit will flow to every nation, every people, every heart willing to receive. But before the river flows in fullness, Ezekiel shows us what must take place: the great shaking, the gathering of nations, the battle that reveals God's hand. Only after the storm comes the river. Only after the conflict comes the peace. Only after the shaking comes the dwelling. This order matters, for we often long for the river without facing the storm. Yet the storm clears the ground for the river. The shaking prepares the way for the glory. What feels like the breaking of the world is in fact the opening of the world for something greater. This is why we must not despair when the world trembles. The shaking is not the end. It is the preparation. Just as the bones rattled before they lived, so the nations must be shaken before the river flows. And when it does, there will be no mistaking its source. It will not come from governments or armies or powers of men. It will flow from the presence of the Lord Himself. The vision of Ezekiel's temple also speaks to us personally, for we are told that we ourselves are temples of the Spirit. If so, then the river must also flow from within us. When His Spirit fills us, life flows out of us into the world around us. Where there was bitterness, healing can flow. Where there was barrenness, fruit can grow. Where there was despair, hope can rise. Each life becomes a channel of that river, each heart a vessel of that glory. The prophecy is not only about a city or a land, but about a people filled with His presence, carrying His life to the ends of the earth. And yet, Ezekiel is clear the center of it all is God's presence. Without Him, the city is just walls, the temple is just stone, and the river is just water. With Him, everything changes. That is why the final name is so important. The Lord is there. Not the strength of Israel, not the plans of men, not the glory of nations, but the Lord Himself. That name is the seal of prophecy, the answer to exile, the end of every question. When He is there, the story is complete. So we must ask ourselves, is He there in us? Is He there in our homes, in our choices, in our hearts? The prophecy points us toward the final revelation, but it also calls us to live it even now. If the Spirit can breathe into bones, He can breathe into us today. If He can bring Israel back from the ends of the earth, He can restore what seems impossible in our lives. If He can defend a nation against overwhelming powers, He can be our shield. And if He can cause a river to flow from a temple, He can cause His Spirit to flow from within us. We are living between the vision and the fulfillment. The bones have risen, the nation has returned. The storm of nations is forming, and the shaking has begun. Yet the river is still to come in its fullness. The city with His name is still to be revealed. That means this is the time of decision. This is the time to stand, to believe, to prepare. Prophecy was not given so we would be curious spectators, but faithful participants. We are called to align ourselves with what God is doing, to be ready when the shaking comes, and to be vessels of His Spirit, even before the river flows across the earth. Ezekiel's prophecy ends with hope, and so must ours. The hope is not that the world will grow easier or that nations will suddenly embrace peace, but that God's presence will prevail. The hope is not that we will avoid the storm, but that we will see His glory through it. The hope is not that the bones will never scatter again, but that no matter how dry they become, His Spirit can raise them. The hope is not in what man can do, but in the unshakable promise of the One who said He would dwell with His people forever. So let us take courage. Let us not be shaken by the storm of nations or the tremors of the earth. Let us not lose heart when the world grows darker. For the darker it grows, the nearer His light. The more the nations rage, the closer His hand. The deeper the valley, the greater the miracle. Just as Ezekiel saw the glory return, so too shall we see it. And when it comes, the name over it all will be the same. The Lord is there. And when that day comes, no enemy will stand, no power will prevail, no exile will remain, and no heart will be left dry. For the river will flow, the temple will be filled, the land will be healed, and the presence of God will cover the earth as the waters cover the sea. This is the end of Ezekiel's vision. This is the promise of prophecy. This is the hope set before us all.